Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much for the introduction. And you're right, your comments, particularly our talks over today, this morning, talking about the challenges you faced in your state, they reminded me of how vital preparation and then execution, particularly where we're solving pandemic problems, come. And it reminds me also, in my world, the issues I work on, how access to telehealth and schooling and work has been an issue for many Americans due to this pandemic. But the Federal Communications Commission chairman, the agency itself, and the industry, they all stepped up to meet the challenge. To join me in a fireside chat on the innovation in communications and technology during COVID-19 and the innovations that are yet to come, I'd like to welcome to the screen the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai.
Hey, Bartlett, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for joining me in this fireside chat. As you can see, it's a totally legitimate fireside chat, just for you.
Literally,
Just for
I'm
you.
very impressed.
Absolutely, the fire is right here. So anyway, welcome, and let me make sure I welcome you not just because I'm here, but on behalf of the entire organization, our members. You got to see a couple of the legislators this morning, but certainly all the state legislators across the nation who make up the membership of ALEC. For those of you who are watching and don't know, Chairman Ajit Pai is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, as I mentioned. He was designated the chairman by Donald J. Trump in January of 2017. He previously served as a commissioner on the FCC, appointed by then President Barack Obama and confirmed unanimously, if you can believe it, unanimously by the United States Senate in May of 2012. He is an esteemed lawyer, I promise you. He has gone to universities of international repute, top names, household name universities, but most importantly, he's a fellow Midwesterner. I'm pleased to welcome you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, great to be with you, and always good to be with a fellow Midwesterner. That's the top credential for any American, I think.
Very good. I love it. And especially, they got up an extra hour early to watch us on the screen for a few minutes. So as I was thinking about how to kick this off, I was trying to think of the most pressing issues that I could talk to you about. And I thought, how do I think about that, talking to a fellow Midwesterner? What would people want to hear from folks from the Flatlands? And it struck me that as Midwesterners, we all have a casserole somewhere in our family gatherings. So I'm thinking, and it's the holiday season. So what's your favorite holiday casserole?
Oh man. Well, hopefully this was in public because I'll get, a lot of flack for it. But my mom used to make this casserole with chicken, cheddar cheese, broccoli, and rice, and then she would sprinkle cornflakes on top. And it was, oh my God, like just the ultimate comfort food. You'd have to have a cardiologist on speed dial to eat it consistently at my age, but nonetheless, it was so, so good. And that's some of the stuff I miss from the Midwest. That and Jell-O salad, I guess.
Oh, there you go. Another great one and a mainstay on any Thanksgiving table. So, by the way, I have one other culinary question. I always try to pick up the most important things I see in Twitter feeds about you. But what is this thing about aversion to bay leaves? Like, what in the world have bay leaves ever done to you?
It's funny. So I put this out there on Twitter about a year and a half ago, and then again earlier this year, because I think that the entire thing is fraudulent. Like every recipe of any significance seems to say, "Oh, add a bay leaf." You're looking at making this gigantic pot of chili. Like, does a bay leaf really make that much of a difference? Especially if it's a dried bay leaf. And so I tried it with and without. I couldn't taste any difference, and so I thought, I think this is just all window dressing. So I put it out there on Twitter, got a lot of people responding back, no, it's got the subtlety of flavor to it. You just don't understand. And so anyway, I will stand up for all the bay leaf truthers out there like me who believe the same thing I do, but are just afraid to say it. So stand, to all of my fellow truthers, stand tall. Our day is coming.
I admire the steel in your spine, sir. All right. Well, we can only have so much fun. We actually do have to get to some work here. So let me first thank you for how to describe it, a thoughtful, active, data-driven chairmanship. A really nice job in balancing the needs of what we kind of the FCC watchers call licensed and unlicensed spectrum, the waves that people use to communicate over, and whether people are licensing those or whether they're just there for use. I know that's been important to you. You've talked about it several times, but why is that balance so important to you and to the country?
To me, it's important because our goal has to be to maximize the use of the public airwaves for the benefit of the American public. And so when I took this office almost 4 years ago, I told my team, to the maximum extent possible, let's make sure that some of the airwaves that are underused or unused are put to work. For licensed spectrum, that's traditionally how the FCC allocates spectrum for the wireless companies. Make sure we free up as much of it as possible and auction it. We've now held four. We're going to start a fifth auction on Monday, as a matter of fact, a big 5G auction. But also on the unlicensed side, this is typically what consumers use for Wi-Fi. And here too, we've had a 5x increase in the amount of spectrum that's available for mid-band Wi-Fi. And that's going to turbocharge the ability of parents to work from home, students to learn from home, for all these devices to be connected. So to me, at least, we want to remove the supply of spectrum as a constraint on innovation for those who are creating these technologies and for the consumers who are relying on them. And hopefully the dividends from some of our decisions will be felt for years to come.
That is fantastic. I know you can't do all of this from the FCC. The FCC does have a nice mandate, but you are critters of Congress. So when it comes to the spectrum pipeline, is there any help you need from Congress?
Yeah, there's a lot. So certainly we would welcome Congress making clear that the FCC has primary jurisdiction over all spectrum issues. It's a little known to some, but we only have a jurisdiction over the airwaves that can be used by the commercial sector. For federal spectrum, that is spectrum held by the federal government, the Department of Commerce has jurisdiction over it. And increasingly, that is a really difficult divide to cross. And so we would love for Congress to clarify what our role here is. The other thing is just to clarify our role in working with state and local governments. I think we're all in it together when we want to make sure that these airwaves can be put to use. And so whether it comes to wireless infrastructure, that of course is a necessary complement to spectrum, we would love to work together with forward-thinking state and local legislators on ways to move forward.
That's great. We love the openness. I'll just speak on behalf of all the state legislators. But let's switch gears. Let's get right down in the business of what everyone has been doing for the last, what are we at, 9 months, 10 months? The pandemic. I'm real impressed, I've got to say, as a watcher of the FCC, that you challenged and then rallied the broadband industry to step up as the nation shut down. How hard was it to nudge the industry and the FCC agency to be so helpful during the surge in broadband usage and to keep people online?
Ironically enough, it wasn't as hard as I might have expected. In early March, I quickly realized, as did our team, that with several hundred million Americans moving to a work from home, stay at home environment, broadband was going to be essential. And so we came up with what we called the Keep Americans Connected pledge, a pledge that any broadband or telephone provider would take, in which they would say, okay, number one, we're not going to cut off any consumers from service because they can't pay a bill. Number two, we'll waive any late fees for those consumers. And number three, we'll open up Wi-Fi hotspots. And I challenged the industry to step up to the plate, and I wasn't sure what kind of reception we would get, but it was tremendous. By the end, almost 800 companies representing the overwhelming majority of American consumers took that pledge, and some of them even went above and beyond, offering low-income consumers special services, working with schools and libraries and the like. I think part of the reason they did was not just the PR aspect. Look, the FCC is asking you to do this, but these are people who live in their communities. They care about their communities. They wanted to make sure that their fellow Americans were not left in the lurch as we dealt with this once in a lifetime pandemic. And to me, I think it speaks of not only the value of the public-private partnership, and a real partnership, not just here we like you to do something or else, but also the power of the market to ultimately deliver value. Because we have these strong infrastructure networks, people were able to go online without suffering a loss of bandwidth. And actually, broadband speeds have increased over the course of the pandemic. And that's because of the market-based decisions we've made well before anyone even heard of COVID-19 that enable the industry to make the necessary infrastructure investments and give us this world-class infrastructure. So we certainly have more work to do, of course, in closing the digital divide. But I'm proud to say that our broadband networks held up, I would argue, better than virtually anyone else in any part of the world.
All the data seems to indicate that on multiple levels. And I invite legislators to check out that information, including contacting me if they have questions on that. But let's get it right to one piece of what you mentioned, and that is people across the country staying online and how well they did it. So here at ALEC, we have a variety of constituencies, and not least of which are rural legislators. And this pandemic has certainly highlighted the importance of the broadband that you were just discussing. What do we do about closing that digital divide, as you mentioned, and make sure that the folks in rural areas have access? So I'm just talking about access, that they could opt in to getting broadband. Is there still room to remove local and state and federal impediments to broadband expansion?
Well, that's a great point. So that's been my top priority since day one. Literally, my first full day in office, January 24th, 2017. I gave a speech to the FCC's employees when I said that this had to be our top mission. And part of that was, of course, professional. That's been the goal of the FCC, to make communication services ubiquitous. But part of it is also personal. You mentioned that I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in a very small town called Parsons, Kansas. And whenever I go back home, I'm keenly aware that folks there are on the wrong side of the digital divide. In fact, just yesterday, I did a town hall with the Parsons Rotary Club. And some folks were flicking in and out because they didn't have a good broadband connection. Some of them weren't able to join at all. And to me, it just underscores the importance of the need for joint efforts, federal, state, local, and tribal, to make sure we're doing everything we can from a policy perspective to close that divide. The FCC has certainly done a lot. And for example, we just finished up the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is ultimately going to be a $20 billion fund over the next several years to promote broadband in unserved parts of the country. We've also been adopting some regulatory reforms to make it easier to deploy broadband infrastructure in rural areas, quicker access to utility poles, for example, or making sure that on federal lands, you don't see a lot of unnecessary barriers to approvals for infrastructure siting. But for state and local governments that are interested, we put together a model code of our own to help speed up broadband deployment in a way that's consistent with FCC regulations and protects your own prerogatives. And that's on the FCC's website, fcc.gov. But we'd love to be a resource for you and a partner with you, because I think at the end of the day, all of your constituents, the folks who are watching, their interests lie in broadband. They don't care whether it's you or the FCC or anybody who delivers it. They just want it to be delivered. So let's work together and speak with one voice. And I think we can get even better results in the years to come.
Really a fantastic point. So we also have a lot of urban friends that we need to think about. And
Yeah.
while there's often a difference in access versus take up, there is still a divide. There are still people who are not online. It's a little bit challenging sometimes as a free marketer. The line is there, people aren't uptaking. What's a free market perspective person supposed to think about that?
Well, our goal in that regard has been to, number one, keep the regulatory barriers to deployment low, so that any competitive company can come in and build infrastructure. And one good example of that was in July of 2019, when we adopted a reform called One Touch Make Ready. And so this is where, if there's a part of a city where there might be some broadband infrastructure, but not a lot of competition, or there's just no infrastructure at all, instead of a fiber company having to come in and beg the electric utility and beg the cable company to move their equipment up a utility pole so they can attach fiber, now they can do all that work on their own. And that's already speeding up deployment in cities like Detroit, where we've seen smaller providers that very few people have heard of making a big splash in deploying fiber. The other thing is just generally promoting competition within densely populated areas. So for example, we started an initiative to look at apartment buildings where there might be any competitive conduct. An incumbent might make an exclusive contract, for example, with the owner of an apartment building, so that the people living in that apartment might not get competitive choice. And we've been exploring, are there ways within the market-based framework that we can use to promote competition. And we've also invited a lot of competition from technologies that didn't even exist when I became chairman. So for example, we've encouraged low Earth orbit satellite companies and fixed wireless companies using unlicensed spectrum that wasn't available in 2017 to enter the marketplace. And some of them are doing that now. SpaceX, for example, is a good example of the space-based competition. There's a company called Starry in urban areas that is providing a very high quality, low cost product. So that's the kind of thing we're doing to try to tackle that urban aspect of the problem.
Fantastic. You weren't online, I'm sure, but in a Wednesday session here at the ALEC meeting, we heard from a company called Ookla, who I know you know well, about broadband speeds across the country and the real need for quality, detailed mapping of speeds. What's the best way to get better mapping to guide better investment across the country?
Oh, well, this one, unfortunately, in the DC speak is easy. money. So last year, the FCC, because I recognized, look, that we need a much more granular sense of who has broadband and who doesn't, what kind of broadband is available and what isn't. So last year in August, we passed what we call the Digital Opportunity Data Collection. And this is essentially going to be a highly granular, very accurate source of mapping data. So it's not just the broadband providers who would report data to us on where they serve and where they don't, but we would also have third-party verification through crowdsourcing and the like. There was one problem, however, that Congress took away our funding for that initiative. So for now 400 and almost 500 days, we've been asking Congress to give us the necessary funding to do the IT work that's needed to kickstart that initiative. They still haven't yet, but I'm hopeful they will do so, and do so soon, because as Ukla pointed out, and as I'm sure all legislators out there hear when they're talking to their constituents, hey, look, this map says I have broadband, but I don't. Or this map says I have gigabit fiber, but I only have 10 megabits per second. Why isn't it more accurate? Well, we need that funding in order to make sure that those constituents' concerns are heard and accommodated. And so hopefully Congress will step up to the plate in short order to do that.
Time is getting short, and I want to make sure I get this question in. I've asked you this before in another interview, and actually love watching your thought process on it. But you've had a great run at the FCC. I literally can't imagine anyone will say otherwise, whether they liked what you were doing or not. You were quite successful. That's interesting. But more specifically, what do you hope that your legacy will be in both the near and long term when people think about the Chairman Pai or even the Commissioner Pai years at the FCC?
Well, you're very kind to say that. And for all those who've expressed support since I made the announcement this past Monday that I'd be leaving the commission in January, thank you from the heart. It's meant a lot to me this week and over the past 4 years. I would hope that our legacy would be that we swung for the fences, that we left everything out there on the field. We made the hard decisions to free up spectrum. We made the courageous decisions needed to help close the digital divide. We made the forward-thinking decisions to promote innovation and invite competition from new sources. And that over time, all of the work that we did to promote a market-based framework will benefit to consumers many years from now, but long after people have forgotten who Ajit Pai ever was or what the FCC does exactly. They will be benefiting from faster, cheaper, better internet access and other advanced technologies. And if that's the case, then I will consider our time at the FCC to have been time well spent. But to me, at least, I'm just grateful for the chance to serve, and so grateful to this country. If you told me 30, 35 years ago, this shy, awkward, dorky Indian kid in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, that he'd have the chance to be tapped by the President of the United States to lead this agency and to get these results for the American people, I wouldn't have believed it, but I would have wanted to believe it. And that's because I think, as my parents do, as all my friends do, only in America. So thanks to this country for everything it's given me.
So I kid you not, as you say that, I have goosebumps. I'm a big believer in the American dream. My dream wasn't as far of a reach as yours, but I came from Southern Missouri, so I understand where you're coming from. Let's take this and put it all together in a nice package for those who are online. What should state legislators be thinking about headed into 2021?
So to me, at least, I think closing that broadband gap is top of mind. Whether you represent a rural district or an urban district or even a suburban or exurban district, there are going to be pockets of people who don't have access or who don't have the access that they need. And so work with us, work with the U.S. Congress to try to come up with creative solutions. Some of it might involve public investment, but honestly, the bulk of it, the bulk of broadband infrastructure in this country is built through the private sector using private funds. And so we need to figure out ways to tailor the regulatory burden to meet the needs of the American people. And, look, I might be leaving the commission in January, but you feel free to consider me a resource, even as I enter a private life, because I really believe in this cause, and there's a lot we can do together. So I would say, broadband availability is at the very, very top. And even after we emerge from the pandemic, I think it's going to continue to be so. So, eyes on the prize. And like I said earlier, if we get it right, the sky's the limit in terms of what Americans will do with the digital opportunity that they are afforded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please consider, as you roll off of the commission and whatever you go on to do, ALEC is a place full of friends. You are always welcome here. We'd love to have an ongoing relationship and share time with you and helping us to understand what's going on out there across the country with telecommunications and technology. We appreciate your time and remarks. And on behalf of ALEC and state legislators across the country, I want to give you all of our thanks for all of your years of service to our country. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you, and I hope it's right here within our halls. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bartlett. Great to be with you.